Buffering. There we go. And good morning. We are live. Welcome to Super Galactic Saturday. I'm Jerry Sr. and with Jerry Jr. here.
Good morning.
And it's a beautiful Saturday morning. It's actually nice and sunny. It was a little bit overcast. Now it's looking beautiful outside. It's very nice. It's summertime officially, right? Nice and warm. It was a nice time at the beach this morning. Rode my bike, and yeah, it was great. I loved it. So I'm thankful to be here. Another day above ground is a good day. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for listening. And feel free to engage, to ask questions in the chat. Let us know what you think. And, you know, thanks for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about
Well, so
nuance.
so before I so what started this idea was I was reading a comic book that was introduced to me called uh, Class War. Came out in the early 2000s. Um, have you heard of Class War?
No, never heard of it.
Yeah, so it's a book by Bob Williams and um, Trevor Hairshine. Hairshine. I just want to say his name right. And it's 6 issues. Came out in between 2002 and 2004.
Okay.
And at first glance, it reminded me of The Boys, so I was a little hesitant to check it out. I read the first couple issues. It basically um, the idea is it's kind of like the super soldier thing on. But what if that program happened post 9/11? If that
Okay.
makes any sense. So it's a team of superheroes who work for the government, and they basically they stop they end the Iraq War before it even instead of lasting a decade, it only
Yeah.
lasts but but the main uh, crux of the story is the main leader of the superhero team, the American. He becomes disillusioned with what he's doing, and he realizes that how corrupt the American government is, and as a result, the American government turns his own superhero team against him. Right? They even kill his sidekick in the first issue. So
So it's pretty
it
good.
yeah. But I really enjoyed it because I was like, oh well, this is a little different. It made me realize I'm reminded a lot of people complain about politics and media and the lack of subtlety. And so I think what they're really complaining about is the lack of nuance. Because there's a difference between subtlety and nuance, even though those things go hand in hand. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they
Right?
definitely do. Yeah.
Going hand in hand, but they're not the same, right? Because you could have a not so subtle story, but it's still nuanced, right? Case
Well,
in
yeah,
point,
yeah. It's like South Park is a good example of the not so subtlety of their storytelling, but at the same time, you understand there's nuance.
right?
Right? It's almost like
Um,
they go the extreme of a particular. Like I just saw their latest one about obesity, right? And it goes extreme in every case, right? People abusing these just drug to lose weight, etc. And it's the most ridiculous scenarios. But at the same time, the subtext is the healthcare system being broken and the abuse of drugs in the suburbs. And there's so much more. There's all these layers where you kind of catch, like, oh, I see what they're saying. But they don't
mhm.
have to say it. That's nuance. That's the subtext of their. It's like, but yet there's blatant, fat here, and the virtue signal and all this stuff. It's pretty hilarious, actually. I watched it a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah,
and but it's like it's a perfect example of what you're saying is. It's like it's not about not saying it. It's about saying it in a manner that we understand. The underlying message you're trying to send, right? You're not treating your audience like they're dumb,
Yeah,
right?
well, it's not even just that. Even with that on the other extreme, well, not the yeah, I guess if you want to call it the other extreme, right? One of my favorite TV shows ever is MASH.
Yeah,
Um, it's a great show. It's clearly, it's a not so subtle anti-war show about the Vietnam War, even though it takes place in the Korean War. But one of the things that I appreciate about it is that not just the fact that they cover a lot of stuff that happened during the Korean War that people don't like to talk about, but also the main character, right, Hawkeye Pierce, isn't always right, right?
right.
I say that because he's the main character for and I love Hawkeye. He's great. He's funny, right? And he tries to, he's very much against the war, which is fine, right? To the point where he even treats. He's like the only doctor on the team that treats the North Koreans, right? So it's
Yeah,
North versus South, because like they're people, and like that's a valid stance to have. But we're in a war, and then the show acknowledges this in one of the episodes because one of the North Koreans he treats tries to kill somebody afterwards, right? Like
right.
he's completely ignoring the fact that hey, some of these people,
Yeah, these people saved your life. Now you want to kill them.
right? Well, not no, not that. It's that Hawkeye. Yeah, you want to treat everybody because they're human, but keep in mind we're in a war. Some of these people are brainwashed, so they're not gonna
Well,
hold your.
well, not
Not everybody
not
holds
just
your values.
yeah, but not even in the context of the show. Not even brainwashed. Just they're loyal to their nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's there's a lot there to read into it, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
the point of nuance is that there's layers, right? There's the surface layer of here's a guy who's a true humanitarian. He's like, I'm going to treat anyone that needs my help because I'm a doctor. I took an oath and I'm going to honor it, right? But then the nuance involved is, well, you're in war, you're going to treat your enemy, and if you do, you understand that your enemy may not return the favor? Like in
Right.
Saving Private Ryan, right? There's a scene like that where one of the soldiers looking for Private Ryan, they engage the enemy, right? And he spares the enemy, right? He overtakes him and he spares him and he sends him on his way because the guy starts blubbering and crying and he's like, and he starts saying like American terms, like like pizza, all this, like these pop culture things to show like, hey, I like you guys. Like, don't I'm just a soldier. I'm just a cog in the wheel. That's the subtext, right? That's the nuance. But then later he confronts the guy again, and this guy this time he overtakes this our the American soldier, and instead of sparing him, he actually kills him, right? Like he doesn't hold back. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
say, "Oh, you spared my life, so I'm going to spare your life."
Right.
It's like no, he does this job as a soldier, which is I got to take out the enemy,
Right.
and he's almost apologetic about it. And once again, it's like I said, it's like on the surface you're like, man, this guy is a terrible person, right? He didn't return the favor, and it's like, well, yeah, but then there's also what's the subtext? What's the nuance here? Is that he's loyal to his country, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna follow orders. And if he spared his life, like there's so much going on in that, right? Where it's like you don't know, like it could be he's a terrible person. It could be he just said what he needed to say just to be let go, right? And it also goes into the differences in culture on a broader scale of American or Western versus at that time, right? German,
Yeah.
and Nazi culture, right? It's like the mindset and things like that, and the I mean, you can continue to explore once the once again the nuance, right? Where because
Yeah.
nuance isn't just one thing; it's many things that's implied, right? From the
Mm-hmm.
and we're speaking in terms of writing and storytelling specifically, not necessarily like politics and like reading people, right? That's a whole other dynamic, right?
Yeah.
But here we're just speaking in terms of like when it comes to nuance in the story, there's the writer's intent, right? Their author's original intent, but then even an author understands that there's other things in that beyond that others will see, right? That maybe that author won't see initially, right? Especially as uh, cultural norms um, change over time, right? And people either become more aware or less aware, right? And that changes how a story is perceived. So yeah, it's like it's multi-layered and it's multifaceted, and but at the end of the day, as a general audience, I'm an audience member, and I like nuance, right? I like it. I don't like it when there's too much, right? Where it's like it gets confusing, like the movie Tenet is sort of an example of where it's like the premise is confusing itself already, but
Mm,
then it's like, sure, there's probably subtext and nuances, like, but where is it? Like, what am I supposed to be reading? Because you don't even understand the overall theme or the principle of the
right.
movie yet. So that's an example of like kind of doing it, in my opinion, the wrong way, right? Where your audience is just unless your intent is to confuse the audience, but then at some point there needs to be like clarification, like a aha, like, oh, that's what it was, right? And that never really happens. So, but yeah, you're right. It's a fascinating instrument of writing, and there's things you use to help deliver that nuance, right? And
Right.
that's metaphor and irony, things like that
Yeah.
in your
But
storytelling, right?
but it's also, it's also making sure that your characters are, nuance is something that helps your characters feel believable, right? In a literal sense, nuance is
Yeah,
literally has to do with well, the like subtle differences and things, right?
yeah. It's
Like
it's it's a
the
subtle,
nuances of your
yeah,
facial expression or body language, right?
right,
That's
exactly,
kind
yeah,
and so that applies to characters as well, and
it does.
let's
Yeah,
it's and I bring it up because a lot of people um you know just to bring up example of a show that, I mean, a more like, I guess you want to call it woke show or whatever, like Stevie Universe. A lot of people like Stevie Universe.
yeah,
There was a really crazy episode. Well, it wasn't crazy, but it was kind of wild that exists. But it just to put it into context. This came out during the Trump election. But there was an episode where to put it bluntly, Stephen meets his conservative uncle. That is the episode.
yeah,
He's a pilot. He finds out his real last name is DeMeo. It's kind of funny, but I was kind of expecting it to be like awful. But the thing is that they don't treat the uncle character as like a bad person. He's just a
right,
regular guy, right?
yeah. It's not
And
it's not black and white.
yeah, and because he's trying to deal with the whole thing is his brother Steven's dad had like moved away from, like, detached himself from the family. He lives in his trailer. He's got a son. He's the exact opposite. He's a professional pilot. You know,
Yeah, he's
he's
more
got a
on the conservative end, responsible versus his
yeah,
dad is kind of more free,
yeah.
living free
And so
and
it
yeah,
yeah, and so it
yeah,
goes into that, and uh, the fact that Steven is being raised by a bunch of space aliens, but it turned, like, they don't treat him like he's an idiot. They treat him like an actual person, and that made the episode a lot more bearable in a sense. Not that it was bad, but it's like
no, but
it
you're right. It's palatable because you're treating the character with sort of a sense of dignity, right? You're not trying to present this one-sided black and white, like conservative bad, liberal great, right? It's more like, hey, here's a guy who, yeah, he's a more traditional character, traditional person, but there's also more to him than just these signals, right? Like him being a pilot is indicative of that. Like someone who's in the military
yeah,
generally
yeah,
is perceived as conservative, right? Even though that's in reality, there's a lot of people who aren't as conservative, But generally
yes,
speaking, that's a correlation, and so that's part of the nuance, right? Where, oh, here he is a pilot, but then he's saying things or doing things that aren't necessarily congruent with conservative, right?
so
And
yeah,
that's where the nuance comes in, where you realize, oh, he's not just this hardcore, stereotypical image of a soldier or a conservative, right?
Yeah,
There's
and yeah,
he's a well-rounded person who has nuance, right? He
yeah.
sees the
So
world in certain ways, and and responds accordingly. Yeah,
yeah, and I bring that up because at the end of the day, whether it comes from Hollywood or not, um, people are going to tell stories based off of their own uh,
their,
personal worldviews
yeah,
and
their
whatnot.
worldview. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, but the thing is that people, what happens is that I think the reason why it's gotten such an issue is because uh, Hollywood is enabling people with, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, with no sense of nuance, right? They're just,
Well, yeah,
and that's
that's a good point. It's I wouldn't even say they don't have a sense of nuance. I would say their sense of nuance is very different than what we tend to expect, because there's a sort of implication, right? There's an implied understanding that somehow the audience will just get it. They'll just accept it, because I think what happens is some of these creators project their worldview onto the general audience. In other words, it's like, well, everyone should see this the way I see it, and so I'm gonna kind of hammer meet nail, right, and be on the nose with this. And even within the context of the story, that whatever property is, from their vantage point, they believe they're being nuanced, right? But their nuance is just very different and runs counter to a general understanding of the world. And that's part of, like,
sure, yeah,
in other words, like, the acolyte's been talked about ad nauseum, right? Because generally speaking, it's just not a great show, right?
yeah,
And part of what makes it not great is, from the audience perspective, the lack of nuance, right? And the lack of taking advantage of these tools of writing, like metaphor. But also, the reality is they are using those tools, but they're using them in a way that is counterintuitive to how the audience receives a story, right? Because the many of the audience either directly or indirectly understand, like, you're trying to tell me something, about these characters, about the world, that doesn't coalesce or run congruent with the lore that's been established already, right? You're ignoring certain things, and you're putting in other things that really doesn't make sense. Like, just as an example, there's a scene. I don't know what episode it was, but the clip's been shared all over the place, so that's how I even know about it. But where they mentioned something about pronouns, between two of the characters, and the thought is, well, here's a story in a galaxy far, far away, long, long ago, right? But they're talking about current day pronoun. It's like it's completely ignores, and on many levels disrespects the property by doing something like that. You understand? That's part of the problem, right? That's part of the complaint, even from someone who isn't, necessarily a political person or anything like that. They're just looking at going, why would Jedi's and Siths, and why would this galaxy even care? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? You
hmm
know what I mean? And it's never been established before, right? When you go back to the original movies, etc., and even the sequels and all that subsequent shows, that's never been a thing. All of a sudden, it's a thing, and it's like, it's only a thing because it's current day social issue, right?
So a lot of
And
a lot of
that's what I'm
the
saying. There's nuance in the sense of their writing their own uh, perception of nuance, right?
yeah.
But it's like I said, it runs counter to the majority of the audience is watching, because they're going, yeah, that's not nuance. That's not very subtle at all, because you're putting in current day, you know,
So I just
terminology.
want to point out as well that I think a lot of the people are the reason why people are able to nitpick so much on the show is because the core of the story isn't great. Like because
Right.
people there's plenty of people always talk meme about a lot of the mistakes in the original Star Wars trilogies. I don't
Yeah.
I mean
Hmm.
mainly just like I've only heard like a couple like the whole Han shot first and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But,
Well, yeah.
but
Yeah.
the reason why you don't hear many people harping on these things is because the core of the story is
It's good.
good because it's
Right.
literally
Exactly.
just it's the hero's journey done right.
It's well received.
So
Right. And
a
that's
lot of
yeah.
the smaller stuff people can ignore because the story made them feel
See, and
great.
that's an excellent
And
point, and it goes to an exchange I had a while back with someone on, I think it was Facebook, where I think I shared a meme about uh, the acolyte or whatever, in regards to the lack of nuance, right? In the the idea that it's very ham-fisted, right? Even though, like I said, from the vantage point of the showrunners and the directors and all, they think they're being nuanced, right? Because they're the nuance they're injecting is something that runs counter to what the general audience wants or expects, right? And it's therefore it doesn't resonate. And then on top of that, they're building their perception of nuance on a very weak thematic story, right? And a thematic story that contradicts the mainstream of the story, right? The main Star Wars, mythos. And then there's smaller things, that they either ignore or change for whatever reason, and that just rubs the fans the wrong way. And then the response though is, "Oh, you're just being a bigot, you're being a racist, you're being a homophobe." And it's like, okay, so because we don't like the story, then this person threw out examples of previous well received stories, right? Like the original Star Wars, like Captain America punching Hitler, and all these different things, and saying it's propaganda. It's always been propaganda. It's always propaganda. It's like, well, not necessarily, right? It's like the difference is much of those things, like a Captain America punching Hitler. It's like, yeah, but Captain America as a character is already established, right? And he has a body of work that people love and enjoy, right? And he's a well created, well crafted character, right? In addition, everyone recognizes the blatant propaganda of that, right? And very few people really celebrate it, although there is a sort of unified perception that, yeah, Hitler is an embodiment of evil for many people on either side of the political spectrum, right?
yeah, I mean to be
So
fair,
to have a
uh,
hero punching someone who represents evil isn't going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, because generally speaking, that's an accepted concept, right?
well, yeah.
And that's like the distinct difference is, yeah, it's true. If I agree with it, it's not going to bother me as much, right, as when I don't agree with it. And that's the sort of elephant in the room with a lot of what's going on with stories like The Acolyte and others, is that they're they're pushing ideas, right, and concepts that run counter to what is accepted mainstream, right? And rather than acknowledging that, yes, this isn't mainstream, we know it's not, so we're going to tell it in a way that's palatable where the general audience will accept it. Instead, it's saying, well, you just have to accept it whether you like it or not.
Well, I
that's
mean,
that's the
I would be
subtext and
careful with
nuance with
saying,
a lot of these stories, is that it's done in a way where it's clear there's a lack of caring about what the audience wants, or even the idea of, well, let me at least present this in a way that's entertaining to you, even though I'm putting in my, a piece of my worldview in there for you to
I would
consume.
be careful with saying mainstream. Like I get what you're saying, but like you know,
It is mainstream.
it. Well, no,
Well,
that's not that. I'm saying, like by that logic, like I guess 50, 60 years ago, right? Uh, I mean, just as an example, you know, what's it called? Racial equality, whatever, wasn't mainstream, or you know what I'm saying? Like you could use that same
okay, I
argument for
see what you're
something
saying. Well,
like the
yeah,
Mr.
that's
Rogers episode where him and the was he police officer? They like
right.
dipped
You're
their feet
talking
in the
about
pool.
there
You
was
know
a
what I'm
time
saying?
when racial equality wasn't mainstream.
Mainstream.
And I would say to that, yeah, that's true. But that's not what we're talking about, because that's another issue, is conflating racial inequality with other topics like transgenderism and LGBT. Those aren't the same. They're not even on the same podium. And I know that's taboo to say, but it's true. They're not. right? We're talking about a moral issue in those sense, in that sense versus, you know, I was born black. I can't help that, right?
Hmm.
And while it's still a moral issue to accept someone of a different race, right? It's like we're conflating two different things. You know, it's like it gets so muddy, right? Because then the ejection is the implication is, well, you just hate. And it's like, well, no, I don't hate. I just don't accept, right? And even within the racial construct, it's like we can get listen. We're going into the weeds because now there's the dynamic of civil rights movement, right, and civil rights laws, right, like
Hmm.
desegregation. Well, that was forced, right? Is it moral to force people to live together that don't want to? You understand what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
so I don't want to get in the weeds when I'm speaking mainstream. I'm talking about generally speaking, right? People don't want it kind of thrown like a pie in the face, right? And
Yeah.
a good example is man, I just forgot the title. It's on Netflix. Um,
Is it
man,
a new show or?
yeah, it's on its second season now. Um, man, why can't I think of it right now? It just escaped me now. But that's a show that has all the things we're talking about, right?
Are you talking about
Um,
Fallout?
no, not Fallout. Although I guess it kind of has something. No, it's animated. What is
Oh,
the title? Arcane. Yeah, it starts with an A also.
okay.
Arcane.
I was literally just about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, Arcane, like that has all that, right? It has LGBTQ representation, feminism, But guess what? They're telling a great story. They're giving you nuanced characters, right? They're giving you a complete world that's fleshed out, right? They're giving you beautiful visuals, right? You understand? And it's not so ham-fisted in your face. It's there's no hyper emphasis on those things. There's an emphasis on, here's this story, here's these characters, this is what happened to them, this is how they responded and dealt with this struggle, right? And it's actually a great show, so, and that's what I'm saying, like to
Hmm.
say that fans of a particular IP like Star Wars, right, or Marvel are somehow racist or homophobic and all these different terms and slurs, right? Because they don't like it. But then at the same time, those same fans will look at Arcane and go, "Man, that's brilliant. We love it." Right? So
Hmm.
clearly, it's not about hating on those groups, right?
No, I don't. I don't.
and
I
and
don't
that's
think
what
that
I'm
at all. I
saying.
think
So,
the
and
show is just
I'm just
probably
speaking
dead.
to your point about mainstream. That's what I'm saying. The
Uh huh.
mainstream has all we're past that, right? It's like there is an acceptance of all these things. There's a extreme tolerance and there's an extreme acceptance, right? But then with certain shows like The Acolyte and others, it's like the nuance in that is that there isn't. You understand? You're not accepting it, so we're gonna hammer it to you until you do. And that's the point I'm making. There's an underlying implication that, yeah, if you don't, and many of some of the actors, the producers, the writers, they literally say this, right? They're like, you're just a hater, right? You're just hating on these people. You're a bigot. You understand? And it's like, okay, so because I don't like it, I don't like being lectured, I don't like the lack of proper nuance, right? Because like I said, a lot of it does have nuance, but it's a nuance that implies something that isn't necessarily true, right? And it's like Invisible Ink. I don't know if you read that book,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
It's a
have that book.
brilliant
Yeah.
book. And one of the points that the author brings up is storytelling is telling the truth, right? That's really what storytelling is. It's telling the truth. And so if you're telling a story that isn't telling the truth, right, your audience, your readers, your watchers are going to pick up on that. And a lot of times that's going to turn them off. And with a lot of the content that's been coming on the last decade or so, longer, and the Acolyte represents kind of the epitome of that, is that you're not telling us the truth. You're telling us lies. You're telling us that we're still hateful, that we're still oppressing you. But in reality, that's not really happening. right? And that's what I'm saying is there is nuance. It's just not a correct nuance, right? It's not a nuance that represents mainstream thought, right? And when I say mainstream, I mean current day. It is current day, right? In current day, there's very little rejection of you know uh, alternative lifestyles, etc., or racial issues. A lot of the times it's the examples that tend to get be put out there. We find out later aren't even real. So um, it's like, yeah, stop telling us that we're oppressing you when that's not happening in reality, right? Stop telling us that we're hateful and we're, this and that, when that's not reality. That's not happening in real life, right? And I know it's art, and art is fiction, right? Generally speaking, but art can reflect life, right? And a lot of times when we watch even stories like Arcane or, it's like we're still looking for elements that reflect a certain reality, right? That's what pulls us in, you know, 'cause having characters that are relatable and that's kind of, at the crust of what we're saying is that they're giving us characters that are so really unrelatable, right? Because at the end of the day, we're human, right? We're all human. So we want to relate to a character regardless of their race or their gender as human. Are you a person, and are you a person that sees the world a certain way that I can understand it or agree with it or even disagree with it, but at least I can respect it, right? Like no one agrees with Loki's worldview, but we can respect him as a character for having it, right? Because he's developed in such a great way, right? In all the iterations we've seen it. You understand? It's like,
Hmm.
and that's all I'm saying. That's why I was saying, like, it's not the lack of nuance per se. It's a different type of nuance that implies something that intuitively the majority of audiences out there don't agree with. Like, we don't agree with that. It's not true. And I think that's what's driving a lot of people to reject it. It's not the just, oh, those conservatives. It's like, no, it's the fact that just people in general, regardless of what your political preference is that you're looking at this, and I'm talking about what we call normies, right? People who aren't hardcore Star Wars fans per se, right? They're looking kind of like, yeah, that was okay. I don't care. I'm not feeling this, like. And over time, that's just what's happened. They're just like, yeah, I'm not, I don't get it, or yeah, that didn't that story didn't seem right, or and then on top of that, you have the departure from the Star Wars lore, or Marvel in the case of Marvel, right, where it's like, well, that wasn't in the original story, or that was never a thing before, or and that's part of it too. Is it's like there's a hyper emphasis on uh, what's been coined the message, right? But at the expense of the story, right? And that's where the complaints lie. Really, sure, there's some who are like, yeah, I'm just tired of the message itself, right? Or, you know what I mean? But generally speaking, for most people, it's not about. Well, we don't want to see any gay people in a movie or TV show. We don't want to see any black people or women. That's nonsense, right? Because, and like I said, the proof is out there with other properties that have been successful, like Arcane, right? Like no one's complaining about it. We're watching it, going, okay, this is actually really good. Wow, like this pulled me in. Like I want more. You understand? Like, or Stranger Things. It's like people just want to be entertained. And they want good stories, right? And what happens is they sacrifice the story, the good storytelling, for the sake of, well, we got to get this, we got to squeeze this message in, we got to get this thing in there, we got to get this type of character, and this, and it's like there's this hyper focus on that, and then they build on top of that, right? It's like building, like in the Bible it says building your house on a solid ground, right? Versus in the sand. Why? Because the sand, when the winds come and the storms, your house is going to collapse. And that's kind of what's happening, currently, is they're building these stories on a weak foundation, right? Just building a story on my skin color is only going to take the story so far, right? Building your story on your sexuality, depending on the story, it's probably not going to go very far, right? It's not going to resonate with a lot of people. But building it on principles, that we all can, relate to and understand, like the human struggle, just living, right? Going through adversity, overcoming adversity, dealing with enemies, right? Or making friends, working together, unity, war, right? All these things affect us, and all these things are human, the human condition, right? And when you build your story on those fundamental things, now you have a sure and solid foundation that's going to give you a great story, right? And then while you're building that story, you can throw in the other things, right? You can throw in a commentary about race or sexuality and gender, or you understand what I mean? Like you can do that, and now you're doing it in a way where it's structure and it's sure, right? It's a sure foundation, and your audience is going to look and go, okay, like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? I mean, that was a great movie, right?
You know, I actually just saw that last night. It was
Okay, yeah,
awesome.
it's actually,
It
you
was
know what I mean?
awesome.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
like personally, yeah, I can say, okay, it's a gay daughter, but it's like at the end of the day, it's kind of like it's still relatable, right? It's two
Hmm.
generations, right? The older
Well, it's
generation has to
three.
accept the
Yeah.
younger. Yeah, three. That's right. You're right. It is three. But you understand what I mean? Like, and you
I mean,
see
yeah. The
that how they
overall
treat
theme was about, yeah, it was
the
about
mother daughter, but the
reconciliation.
mother as well, with her parents and
Well, no, not even just
accepting all
that.
that
I'm just
stuff. So
saying, like the overall theme was about, you know, not a, control your actions, whether they matter or not, right? And then at the movie, at the end of the day, the answer was still yes, even though there were all these features
yeah,
where,
all these. Well, yeah, it was probably one of
but
the better iterations of that concept of the multiple dimension, multiple world, parallel worlds.
well, it had
Because
to,
yeah,
it
her
got,
actions still mattered regardless of how many versions there were of her.
yeah,
It's like this, your version still matters, right? Like
hmm
your version mattered, and yeah, and that was brilliant. It really was a brilliant movie. It was very relatable. It was very entertaining.
and the action was
It was
awesome.
fun. The action was awesome. Visually, it was stunning. I mean, there's a reason why it was highly acclaimed, right?
Yeah.
So, and once again, right, and that's what you understand. It you can argue it has woke in it. It's like okay, but it's woke done right, right? And that's really it. It's is there's woke done wrong, and that's Acolyte and a lot of Disney properties as of late, and then there's woke done right, and that's Arcane and Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? It's done right. It's done, and it's like you take those things, but you wrap this really cool, awesome, wonderful, relatable story around it, right?
Hmm.
And it's like um, you make a big stew, you know, and the broth is delicious, but then you throw in all the healthy stuff, right? The broccoli and right, where alone you wouldn't eat it, you wouldn't want it, right? But inside the stew, it's delicious, right? That's kind of what a good story is. The story is the stew, right? And those elements, the good stuff that you want to put in there that you want your audience to consume and accept, you got to throw it in that stew to make it delicious, right? To make it palatable, and that's not happening, right? They're starting backwards, and they're throwing in all the stuff you don't really want because you're kind of just hitting me over the head with it, and then they're trying to add some kind of bland, you know, you know. Maybe they're just adding water, right? It's not really even a broth. It's not seasoned. It's not.
Water.
You understand what I mean? Like it's the broth isn't good, right? Because you did it wrong. You did it backwards, and that's kind of what's happening. And it's like what most of us are saying is, please stop giving us bad soup, right? Give us good soup. Give it to us where it's palatable and enjoyable and exciting and fun, and we can get excited about it again, and not get bogged down with the quote unquote message, right?
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, like that's really what's happening, and it's very exhausting because, like I said, you get people like the person I interacted with. Their argument is you're just a bigot, and it's like, okay, I don't know how that's, creates any kind of dialogue, or if that solves anything. It's like like the opposite's not happening, where you're just calling people names just because they have a certain character in their story. It's like, no, we're saying, look, fine, you want to have that black, female lesbian paraplegic in your story, go ahead, right? But make her interesting. Give us a good story about her, right? That's all we're saying. That's all most people, most fans are saying. You know, is fine. Just and it's like it's become so blatant though, and that's the issue. It's just it's blatant. It's you know, and it's kind of frustrating to a lot of people, right? And that's why people are turned off. That's why Disney's losing money. You know, um, it's just turning people off, and it's not turning off the YouTubers or whatever. It's turning off just regular folks. Regular folks are like, yeah, I'm not feeling this. I'm gonna go somewhere else. So and then because that's happening, that's why we're here. We're saying, hey, check out our stuff, right?
Mhm.
We're just telling you our goal is to entertain you and tell you a good story. And yeah, it's going to have elements of our worldview in it, and hopefully you'll like it. If you don't like it, that's okay. It's not for everybody. I understand that. Everybody doesn't like everything, right? But we're hoping that most of you, right, the majority of you will like it and enjoy it, regardless of where you stand politically or otherwise, right? Because our goal is not to isolate or divide people. Our goal is to bring everyone together to rally around just a great story, right? And that should always be the intent of any storyteller. Is I want this to resonate to as many people as possible, right? Um, and sadly, it just doesn't seem like that's the goal currently in the majority of you know these studios, right? It's it's unfortunate, you know. But yeah, I think yeah, you're right. The fundamental issue is the perception of the lack of nuance, right?
Yeah, because I mean, the same is true on the opposite end of, I guess, if you want to call it the political spectrum, whatever. But we were just talking about what's it called, the new norm,
Yeah.
and I know you. I'm not telling you to watch it. Don't watch it. I know how you like
Don't,
to
don't,
watch.
don't tell me what to do.
I just did. I would bring it up because it is. I saw like a episode of it, and I couldn't. There's a lot of shows that were I could just tell I'm not gonna enjoy it from like the first
Yeah. Yeah.
10 seconds,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those shows because, like I said, it's trying to be all in the family, but
Right.
it misses the point entirely. But also, it's just badly written. Like
Yeah.
it's the
And this is
dumbest.
something that is supposed to be on the more conservative end, right? So far
Right,
as
but the
like
the
the
problem is that
creators and
once
the
again,
subject matter, right?
it's not even just beyond. It's just the writing is just terrible. Like
Yeah. No, but I'm
there's
saying
that.
like we're it seems like the emphasis is always on the more liberal, right, aspect of, like I said, like Disney Star Wars and Marvel, where they lean heavy towards more liberal concepts and ideas, right? The
Mhm.
political. But even on the response to that in many ways is just as bad, right? Like you look at the Daily Wire, and like well, this one, the new norm is he said it's produced by Officer Tatum, right? I think he's a
Well, it's
conservative,
not. It's not
or he's
produced by him,
connected
but
to it somehow,
it's
or
yeah. I
is he
think he
a
voices one of
voice in it?
the
Okay, okay, he's in it
yeah.
as a voice character. Okay,
Uh,
got it. But it's supposed to kind of lean more conservative, though, right? Insofar as the
yeah,
premise.
but the
Yeah,
problem is it's not. They're not actually trying to tell a story. They're just trying to
yeah.
make
But
fun of
that
people.
speaks to what I'm saying, though. It's the same
Yeah.
coin, different side, right? It's like Mr. Bertram. That's another one from the Daily Wire, right? And it's kind of like, okay, so you're saying, well, there's all this liberal stuff, we're going to put some conservative stuff, and say, okay, but then there's a hyper emphasis on the conservative part and not on the story, right? It's the same problem, right? And you look at them and you're like, okay, I see what you're trying to do, but you're failing because you're not entertaining us, right? You're just
Yeah.
trying to once again propagandize an ideology, worldview, which okay, fine, but you gotta once it's that stew, you gotta make a good stew. Then you throw in the stuff that's good for you, right? Throw in the veggies, right? But you gotta make that broth delicious, or else we're not gonna eat our veggies, right? We're not gonna want it, and that's just what's happening. It's like it's a problem because we're getting away from the just the fundamentals of just look what happened to entertaining people. What happened to giving us like when Star Wars, the original Star Wars was made, was George Lucas thinking I'm gonna indoctrinate this audience to believe something, right? Whatever it is, right? No, he had an idea. He
Yeah.
was inspired by previous works, obviously, right? But you know what I mean. And he's like, I'm going to tell the hero's journey, and he did it. He just told this great story, and we loved it, right? And it paid off, and we got two more after that, right? And they were great, right? And some say one was better than we get into all that, but generally speaking, we loved it, right? Most people, not only in the states but around the world, love Star Wars, right? It just resonates with us, regardless of what message is in it or whatever you can extrapolate from it. We love the story, we love the characters, the universe, right? The concept, and that's what we want. That's what most people want. We want to hear and see and engage in stories that resonate with us and inspire us, right? Gets us
Yeah.
excited and maybe it does make us think or like philosophize, and that's fine. But it's like at the end of the day, it's like entertain us, right? That's what we're, especially in this space. There's exceptions, right? There's documentaries and there's all these different things, but those are exceptions, right? Not the rule. The rule is when you're dealing in, the mainstream of the culture, and you're trying to entertain us, right? And then you want to slip in some moral lessons, and that's fine, right? But primarily, you want to tell us a good story. You want us to inspire us and get us excited for your characters and for your story. And yeah, I'm looking at these two things, the Mr. Bertram, and it's like they're not inspiring at all. They're kind of like, okay,
No.
it's an extension of the political talking heads we see. You know, that's kind of all they are. They're just putting in political commentary. You know, and it's like they're wrapping political commentary around the story versus the other way around, right? And that's the problem, right there. It's just the same issue, just on the other side of the ideological spectrum, right? And so, and the reason why it's not, no one's really harping on this as much is because it's not happening as much, right? These are, relatively speaking, kind of exceptions, right? They're not the rule. I mean, what's become the rule is what's happening with the larger studios like Disney. But
Hmm.
with these are exceptions, and they're in a way direct responses, or to what we've been seeing from the studios, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, you guys are pushing that, I'm gonna push my ideas, right? That's great. You know what I mean. Like that's fine. That's why we enjoy our freedoms, right? What little we have left, and this is one of them, is to tell stories. And so that should happen. It's just when you do it, you have to prioritize story. You have to prioritize telling a story that's good, that people like. It can't be, you know, you're you're just preaching at
If
you're just
if
preaching
you're
to the choir,
just yeah, if you
yeah,
just want to make a point, then write an essay,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Do an op-ed,
Don't make
yeah.
a don't make
Make a
a
YouTube
cartoon.
channel, yeah, exactly. Don't make a cartoon, right? Don't make a movie just to.
Like if you're not a
Well, no,
storyteller,
you can, yeah, but yeah, prioritize story.
yeah, I'm just
I
saying
mean,
if you're
like
not going to,
a good example is Ripperverse, right? Eric July, he's an anarcho-capitalist. He's libertarian. He does lean conservative in many of his views. But you look at his books, and I got a few of his books. I read ISOM 1 and 2,
Mhm.
and Alpha Core, and they're great. They're great stories. There's no hammer over the head messaging, right? It's like this is the world, you know, these are the characters and this is what they're doing. These are the, and but there is nuance, there's subtext, right? Like the
Mhm.
latest one is Gooding, who's this sort of private entrepreneur who offers like detective and police services and medical care and firefighting. but it's all privatized, right? He charges a fee. That's obviously an extension of his libertarian anarcho-capitalist views, right?
Yeah.
That's fine, right? It's not over your head. This is a character that's been developed and he exists in this world, and now you get to see how what he does plays out, right? Like what is it going to look like, and and that's great. you know, like it doesn't have to be something that's just so on the nose because he prioritized story and character development over the ideological aspect, right? So he created a character, he built the story, and then he poured in the ideology into hopefully a good story. I haven't read it yet. I'm hoping it's a good story.
I mean, it's fairly new. I saw the trailer.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
trailer is
So look, yeah,
actually
looks
pretty good.
interesting. Yeah. So, but you understand what saying with Isom, it's like you can see with Isom's character, he's a private citizen and all this stuff. He has a ranch. He is a business owner. So he's obviously entrepreneurial, right? It's like, yeah, we understand there's some nuance and subtext in that alone, right? And it's like, yeah, but it's not over the top where you're like, I'm a capitalist, and he's not, like the story's not in your face, literally telling you what he is. You get to read the story
Hmm.
and see the world he's in. You can extrapolate. Oh, I see what's going on. Oh, okay, right. And that's what you want because you can still be entertained by the story, by the character, and the events, and that's what you want. You want to be inspired and like, yeah, okay, this is pretty cool. This is and that's what's not happening with some of these bigger studios, right? Even speaking of comic books, DC and Marvel, same thing. They're guilty of the same thing, just prioritizing the DEI, right? Checking the boxes over telling a good story, right? And they're reaping the whirlwind for that as well. So yeah, but that's really it. It's not about hating people. That gets so tiring because it's just an excuse for when the property doesn't do well. But then you don't hear anything though about Arcane, right? No one's saying that because most people loved it, right? You know,
Yeah.
most people are like, yeah, this is actually really good. This is a great this is objectively good, right? It's an objectively
Yeah.
good story, right? So you can complain and say, oh, I don't like this or that, because of my religious beliefs or political, whatever. But it's like at the end of the day, though, you can kind of say, well, but it's a story, right? And it's actually a good story, regardless of what I agree with or not. And that's a sign of an effective story is that you can watch it or read it and be entertained by it and still disagree with certain things presented in the story, but still know, oh, but I did enjoy it though, right? Right?
Yeah.
That's a sign of good storytelling, and that's all I'm saying. It's like, what happened to that? It seems like it's all but disappeared, in the mainstream Hollywood at least, right? So, and that's really the complaint of most people. And just to bring that clarification, because it's important, because in the media, in the news and all this, the trades, right? It's like it's so disingenuous, right? Because they love to co-sign what some of these writers and showrunners are saying. Like with Doctor Who and all this, that it's, oh, they're just, those are the bigots and those are the toxic fans and all this nonsense. And it's like, no, there's no such thing as a toxic fan, right? There's no such thing as sure, there's a few bad people who say terrible things online, right? But at the end of the day, the vast majority of fans in Star Wars or Marvel or Doctor Who, they're not hating anyone. They hate bad stories, right? That's
Yeah.
all they. That's the only hate that's happening is I hate bad stories. I like good stories. I love good stories. Give us good stories. That's what they're saying. That's all they're saying, right? Tell us great stories. And if you do that, fans will be happy. You'll make money. You'll be profitable. And you can still inject your DEI stuff. You know. So we got a comment here from R.J. William. He says mainstream despises normal values and human experiences. They also don't seem to understand how normal humans think and interact. I think it's the result of decades of nepotism and hiring unqualified people. continued and not sharing the same values and experiences as normal people. That's an interesting point. That's a good point. Like, you're speaking in terms
Yeah,
of like sort of having an elitist kind of worldview, in Hollywood. And yeah, I think that's part of what drives it, right? Is it's something we see in government politics. It's in Hollywood. It's a reflection in Hollywood of this elitism where we have to sort of tell people what's true, like what's good. We have to like, they don't know any better. That's the attitude as well. Like that's why when some of these things don't do well, there is that condescending attitude of like, well, they don't know any better, right? Those are just the biggest. Those are the hate. That's part of it too. Those are the haters and the bigots because this is art and this is excellent. Like this is a
yeah,
masterpiece, and it's like no, it stinks. But yeah, you're in your ivory tower, so to speak, and you really don't understand how just regular people see the world and how they respond to good stories. And yeah, I agree with that. I think it's probably a big driver. That's probably how it's able to the whole DEI thing is able to really permeate Hollywood so easily because it coincides and coalesces with that ivory tower mentality, that elitist worldview. To say that we are the moralists and we have to tell the peons how to think and how to be good, right? And that's what we're doing. We're saving them by telling these stories and injecting these, the quote unquote message in, right? We're helping people. We're helping humanity. You know, yeah, I agree. It's that mentality. Yeah, and it's like they're not actual elites. I agree. But they have that mentality. you know, it's like
yeah,
they're not actual. Maybe a few, right? As far as like the upper echelon of some of these entertainment companies, but yeah, you're right. They're not actual elites, but they have that. They've adapted that worldview and that mentality. It's like W.B. Du Bois, right? There was always this sort of contrast between him and Booker T. Washington. And from if you read some of his writings, W.B. Du Bois, you'll see he did have a elitist uh, attitude towards black people, right? He's the one that developed the idea of the talented tenth, right? And it's that 10% of the talented and intellectual intelligentsia of black people that will lift up the 90%, right? And it's an absurd idea, but he really believed that. He pushed that. He advocated for it. And a lot of people have adapted that. You know, that it's these small few people who are the creme de la creme, or and what happens is you create uh, that culture, and then when you bring in some of these new, because a lot of these writers are brand new writers and directors, etc. They haven't done much, especially in this particular space, whether it's in comics or Hollywood. But then they get these opportunities to write these, amazing, work in these amazing IPs, right? Like Marvel and Star Wars. But it's like they've been specially picked, and is the mentality like I'm special, like you know, I'm this special talent, and I'm gonna save the masses, by telling them these stories, and I'm gonna, you know, put that message out there, and that's going to change the world, and I'm making the world better. And it's like, no, you're not. But within their circles, that's what's being reinforced over and over again. I believe that a lot of them really do believe what they're saying. They're and part of it is, I think they're kind of, especially among the younger, like some of the actors and actresses. I think part of it is also they're just regurgitating what's been told to them. What's been encouraged from whoever's in their circles, their agents, their uh, other executives and producers. They're reinforcing that worldview, um, and they're just so they'll say, yeah, it's the haters, it's the bigots, all this kind of stuff. And it's like what's the name, the chick that played Katniss, remember, from Hunger Games. And
oh,
she's quoted
yeah,
saying that she's like the first female action star or something like that.
Yeah,
I forgot. I forgot
I
exactly.
remember that.
It was like so absurd. Like I'm the first female. It was like what are you talking about? It's like,
Yeah,
but in her circle,
yeah. Jennifer
right?
Lawrence, you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Jennifer Lawrence, right? In her circle, that's probably what she's
I
been
mean,
told.
which is
She's been,
crazy because I
it's
mean,
like, well, Ellen Ripley exists, right?
or not even Alan Ripley. I
Wonder
mean,
Woman,
arguably, what's
Jimmy
her name?
Carter.
Pam Grier
Yeah,
was
Pam
the first
Grier. Thank
female
you.
action hero.
Go even further back, right? It's like,
Yeah,
what are you talking about? But that's what I mean. But it's like that doesn't happen like out of nowhere. I believe there's people around her, right? Whether they're doing it willfully or they're just as ignorant as she is, but they're reinforcing this
well, not
mindset.
not even just that. I remember when what's his name, Seth Rogen. He was like tweeting about how people should just get over the fact that uh, you get your things stolen in
Yeah, yeah, it's no
LA.
big deal. Yeah, it's like, what are you
And
talking
it's
about?
like, yeah, it's like
Yeah,
because it's just
it's
like, yeah, I've had
but
my.
it
He's like,
you're
yeah,
gonna
I've had
be
my car
trouble.
broken into it 3 times. Big deal. It's like, yeah, no, this is a big. Not we can't
Yeah, that's a
always
huge
afford to
deal.
replace our
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, like what are you talking about, man? That's terrible.
So
But yeah, you're right. It's like there's this bubble where you know, and it's not even about they just didn't come from humble beginnings. I'm sure many of them did, but once they're in that circle, right? Once you're in that sphere, it's like this constant echo chamber of ideas and concepts. You're not going to accept anything else that comes from outside of that,
yeah,
right?
I think
And
the
so
reality
it
is
causes
that
you to say things that come off as very detached, right? Like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, that makes no sense, but it makes no sense to us because we're operating in the real world where we got to do, like I have to commute to work and deal with people. And, you know, like I don't have this bubble of people that just constantly tell me I'm wonderful, right? But
yeah,
they do.
I think it's important to remember that uh, they say money changes people, and I think the reality is that money's or wealth and power simply elevates who we really are. You
Sure.
know what I'm saying? And
I,
I say that
but
because it's like,
I think both are true. That it brings out the real you, but it also changes you. I think the context matters, right? In this case, like I said, when you get into and I've worked with people in Hollywood. I've done talent management in the past and things like that, and it is a different world. And once you hit a certain level where you're operating with certain types of people, right? And I'm not talking about like they're all just terrible. I'm not. I don't mean like. I just mean they have a certain mindset, right? It's a lot of the stuff you see in self help books and where it's like you're a winner mindset and all this kind of stuff, and it becomes a very almost spiritual dynamic, and it's constantly reinforced with everyone you interact with when you're going to casting calls, when you're going to auditions, when you're on the set, when you're. And generally speaking, it's like, yeah, it's just a constant echo chamber. And so, yeah, it can bring out something in you that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, because now there's the money. Money brings that comfort, right? That safety net. But also, it does change you too. It can cause you to adapt something that otherwise you would have rejected, right? Just on principle and just common sense alone. But because you're in that echo chamber, it's almost like the idea if you hear something over and over again, like that song on the radio, you hear it over and over again.
yeah,
Eventually, you're humming it. It's in your head. Right? It's
yeah,
kind of like that, right? There's a constant. You're inundated because you're in those circles. So it's like it's 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 almost unavoidable if you're always in those circles. And a lot of these actors and actresses and directors, etc., they're in those circles. That's especially when you're young. You're highly influ. You can be highly influenced, right?
hmm
It's kind of no wonder they're saying things like that, and you're like, huh? But that's a reflection of the circles they're running in, you know. And it's kind of tragic because eventually, time bears out all truth, right? And so eventually, the truth will hit them, right? Reality hits, and it's like, oh, that's not what I thought it was, right?
Yeah.
Uh, that's happening for a lot of people even now, just in relation to the economy and policies, things like that. People are fleeing California, right? Because their worldview has kind of been shattered, where they're like, oh, like this isn't sustainable, right? Constantly
Yeah.
taxing and these crazy rules and laws, creating more crime. It's like I got to get out of here. Like, what's her name? Jillian Anderson, I think, is something like that. She was on The Biggest Loser. She's a personal trainer, and
Oh, okay.
she was in the kind of trending recently because she did an interview where she's like, and she's very liberal. She's a very liberal
Oh, I know
person.
what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's like, even I'm saying I'm getting out of California.
Where she was, yeah,
It's
she's like,
getting
yeah,
just
I
like
check
it's
all these
wild.
boxes, and even I'm leaving
Yeah,
California.
exactly. She's like, and that's what's going to happen with a lot of these people in Hollywood, these young people, these actresses, is eventually they're going to kind of hit, you know, smash into that wall of truth, and they're going to be like, "What is this? Oh, so you mean I'm not the first, whatever?" And oh, it's not a good thing to have your car broken into even once, let alone three times, right? Like you know, and you know they'll see it eventually. It might be too late by the time they do, but they will. But yeah, thanks RJ for the comment. You're right on the money. Um, it's like it's just a kind of a whole other world. And you're right. To your first point about how they despise normal values, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I said mainstream. It's like even back in the day of segregation, there were still mainstream values. You understand? We can look at uh, the 50s and 60s or whatever and say, oh, that was a bad time. Well, it was bad that segregation existed as enforced by government. That was bad, right? People who segregate on their own, more, that's their business,
Yeah,
right?
that was good. I was
Um,
going to say I want to bring up something important that if you talk to a lot of, well, not, I don't want to say a lot, but I've seen interviews of people who lived during that time,
mhm.
and they're just talking about how like yeah, I mean, yeah, I had black neighbors even before
Yeah, that's
the
right.
whole uh,
Yeah,
civil rights thing, and like I would go over to their house, and they would come over to my house
right.
as kids,
See,
children. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, listen, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. This is something that never gets talked about, and it needs to be. And the fact is, Jim Crow laws, and we're diverting to another topic, but
I know.
this is
I'm sorry. I
no,
just
but this
I
is
just think
important
it's
because it's something that really annoys me. It's like Jim Crow didn't just only affect black people; it affected everybody. You have to understand there were white people who, like you said, they were neighbors with black people. There were white people who probably had family members who were black. There were white people who had businesses and they had no problem serving black customers and not segregating them. Right there, but they weren't allowed to by law. See, the law didn't just say blacks only here, right? It also said if you're a white business, you can't serve blacks unless you separate them. You understand? So it negatively affected everyone, right? Because believe it or not, not every white person was a racist, even during those times, right?
yeah,
Like, there's a reason why the civil rights movement gained so much traction. It's because a lot of those people who marched with King were white, right? There's a lot of white folks that were involved in the civil rights movement. So it's kind of this misnomer that it only affected black people. It's like, no, it affected everyone. That's what made it wrong, right? The principle of freedom of association, right? It's a constitutional right. That's what made it morally and ethically wrong, right? It's not wrong for a predominantly white community to just simply say we just want to keep our community white, whatever, right? Those are individuals, families. They own the property. They can do whatever they want, right? That's freedom. And by the same token, for a black community to say we don't want no white folks, right? Believe it or not, that was the case in parts of the South where a lot of blacks willfully segregated from certain types of whites. mainly the rednecks, etc. Because they represented a poor quality of life, because they made poor choices, because they tended to be violent criminals, etc., etc. They had a deviant lifestyle, and so a lot of blacks led by black churches were like, don't hang out with those white folks, those rednecks, etc., because of the culture, not because they're white, but because their culture was depraved. And so black people segregated themselves, right? So it wasn't just one side pulling away from the other side. It was both sides because they represented a certain cultural value, generally Christian, right? And saying, well, we're not going to associate with those types because they don't represent our cultural values, right? And that's a big part of what was going on during those times. It still goes on even now, but that's not talked about, unfortunately, because
Yeah.
it's better, it's easier to romanticize civil rights and Martin Luther King and the speeches and all this stuff, and that all black people were victimized, and it's like, well, no, not really. Some black people, you know um, they segregated themselves, and some white, obviously white people did as well. But the problem with Jim Crow and forced segregation was the fact that it was the government doing it, right? The government was making us separate. And then it turned around and forced us to integrate, right? Both are wrong. Both are morally, ethically, and constitutionally wrong, right? The only thing that should have happened with Jim Crow was just eliminate that law. It just needs to go, right? That's it. It's wrong. It's unconstitutional. That's it. There shouldn't have been this. Well, now we're going to shut down all these black schools that were, many of them were doing just fine, right? We're going to make them shut down and force all these black people to go to these white schools and force the
Right.
white schools to accept them, right? That's the problem, right? It's like we gotta stop thinking the government is this moral agent, right? It's not. The government is not a moral agent. The government is merely an institution of people who think they know better than you, right? And they actually don't. So that's my 2 cents. I'll get off my political soapbox,
Well,
but that's just something that
well,
kind of bugs me. That it's rarely talked about, but it's like, yeah, it wasn't what we thought it was. Like, there were white businesses that actually wanted to serve black customers and they couldn't by law, right? Um, so the law affected everyone, and that's the heart of the problem, is the government being a moral agent when it's not, right? It can enforce laws that are rooted in moral principles, like murder is wrong, right? Therefore, there's laws against murder, right?
right.
Stealing is wrong, therefore, there's laws against stealing. That's how it works, right? The moral principle has to exist in order to build a law on top of it, right? The foundation of the law is the moral principle that underlies it. If there's no moral principle that underlies the law, then it's an unjust law. It's not a real law, right?
Yeah.
You understand? Like, it doesn't make sense, you know. And that's kind of what's happening with a lot of stuff that's going on, is we have so many laws that aren't rooted in any type of moral principle. They're rooted in somebody's perception of what they think should happen because reasons, right? Because of some ideology they have. Like in California, there's a law that you can steal up to, I think it's around $900 something and not be prosecuted. That's an idiotic law, but it's under the guise of some type of, mercy for criminals, or some type of empathetic perception that people who steal or shoplift aren't actual criminals. It's like, that's ridiculous, right? you know, it's like, if stealing is wrong, right? Period. It's wrong. It's morally wrong. You can't. You can make exceptions once the person is arrested and you bring them before a judge or a jury, and then they can decide to exercise mercy, right? That's what jury nullification is. The jury doesn't have to enforce the law. They can nullify the law based on certain exceptions and contextually based on the case, right? So if you're a poor person who
Mm,
stole a sandwich from Subway because you were starving and you saw the opportunity, but you got caught, right? Well, we're not going to put you in prison for 2 years because you stole a Subway sandwich, right? hopefully no one with any sense, any judge or would do that. They would go, okay, well look, stealing is still wrong, but we're not going to put you in jail. We're going to suspend the sentence, and we're going to have you do some community service to pay off for the sandwich and whatever court fees, and then we're going to try and maybe help you get some rehab or help you get some housing or whatever whatever the need is. But you understand what I'm saying? Like that's what should happen after the fact. But you don't preempt it by saying, well, look, if you only stole $1,000, we're just not even gonna arrest you, right? Like that's ridiculous. That makes no sense, right? So, but that's what I'm saying. Like we got to get away from that mindset that the government is a moral agent. It's not. It's almost the opposite of that. So,
Yeah.
but I digress. But yeah, I think if we can encourage existing Hollywood, right, to tell good stories, and get away from hammering the message and focus on telling a great story, and then sprinkling the message, right? You understand what I mean?
Well,
Like,
I mean, you say encourage Hollywood, but we don't. Nobody needs Hollywood anymore, and I think
well, that was
most
going to be
people
my next
understand
point.
that.
That's the one side, and the other side is, hey, you know, entertainment now is becoming more and more what they say democratized, right? More of us can step in and do our part and create, like I look at it, I want to create what I want to see, right? And I think there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of others who also want to see it. And so let's do it. Let's create it.
Yeah.
Let's write it. Let's film it. Let's animate it. Let's make that music. And now we talked about this before about how AI, the introduction of AI technology, has really disrupted Hollywood in a big way, right?
Yeah.
And some see it as bad, like a lot of artists don't like the art generators and all that. I don't have an issue with it. I don't think they're that great yet. Um, for one, and two, I see them as a tool, not as a replacement for an artist. Because while you can put in a prompt that says make this color or whatever, it never gives you exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Only an artist can give you exactly what you want. You understand? Because
Hmm.
an artist knows, like in his head, like what you're like. There's this, speaking of nuance, right? There's
Yeah.
nuance in how humans communicate, right? When I work with our artists and I say I want my character Alphatron to have this, and this, right? And I want to have, and I can piece together images and captions and whatnot to build him out, right? And then say, make this. Well, I know he's not going to literally make that hodgepodge of that collage of images, right? He's going to make a complete, finished, refined character illustration that fits the
Right.
description I'm trying to communicate. Why? Because he understands what I'm trying to communicate as a human. And I don't have to specifically say it all the time, right? I can just imply, like, hey, give him a nice rugged jawline so he looks masculine. And he's gonna understand that. He's gonna do it. And he's not gonna be exaggerated and give me this cartoony jaw, right? George of the Jungle, right? He's
Yeah.
gonna give me
Crimson
what I'm,
Chin.
because he
Yeah.
understands. Yeah, the crimson chin. He's gonna give me. He understands the nuance of what I'm saying, and that's what's missing with AI. And I don't think we're gonna get that for a long time. At least not when it comes to art, at least. But it's like, yeah, you can put in a prompt and it spits out what you wrote, and it's only going to spit out a variation of what you wrote. It's never going to spit out exactly what's in your head.
Yeah.
Never, unless you're doing an already known property like Superman, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's never going to understand the nuance of what you're going for. You're going to have to do the heavy lifting and create what you specifically want somehow. Either you're going to do it yourself or you're going to hire another human artist to do it. But you're not going to get exactly. And to me, that's where it breaks down the most. Is you'll never get exactly like all this AI movie stuff, AI video. I see all these videos, and sometimes it's like, okay, that's pretty interesting, A lot of times there's no real narrative. It's just stuff happening, and it looks visually pleasing, right? There's an aesthetic, but I'm like, at the end of the day, none of that matters because there's no story.
Yeah.
Like you
Well,
have
some
to
of the
tell a
best
story.
AI content I've seen has been from people utilizing because there's more than
Right.
one type
They're
of
they're
AI
making
tool out
right. They're
there.
making stories with it. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
and
one of
that's
my
still
favorite
kind of rare though.
YouTubers right now is I think his name's Dennis World or something, but he does like how these dumb like put Dragon Ball memes
Yeah.
skits,
Yeah.
and they're hilarious because it's like it's taking a lot of these really basic, really dumb, like really like mundane concepts, like dapping someone up and like animifying it, and it's
Yeah.
hilarious. It's
It's funny. Yeah.
yeah, it's like he stretched his arm out to increase the voice of the force of the dap, and it's like yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But
also,
he's still
he's writing the scripts. He's just using
right.
AI voices
Yeah.
because he can't voice act
Well, that's what I
people.
mean. Like
You
it's
know
a,
what I'm saying?
he's leveraging it as a tool so that
Yeah,
he's more efficient. He can probably produce a lot faster. And to me, that's where it's going to shine. Is artists, writers, musicians will be able to just produce more, and I believe at a higher level because now some of the heavy lifting is out of the way, but also it just increases productivity, right? And it gives you more ideas, right? You can iterate and just generate ideas and be inspired. So I see it as a plus. I don't see it as a negative. I don't think it's going to replace artists. It might replace terrible artists.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, but if you're a terrible artist, maybe you should just rethink your career. I don't, if you understand, like if you're not a great musician, like people won't buy your stuff, then maybe, you know, so maybe it'll do that. Like it'll filter out, you know, the sort of the mediocre, I guess.
That's all I really see
Yeah.
happening, to be honest.
But I don't see it eliminating artists, like jobs and stuff. Like because even the studios that have used AI, I think Disney used it for one of their shows, like for the intro. And
Yeah,
recently, who was it? They made a was it Chick-fil-A or something or some mainstream restaurant. Oh, Toys R Us. It was Toys R Us. I don't know why I said Chick-fil-A. Toys R Us did a AI commercial, right?
they
And
did.
yeah, it looks decent. It's not bad, um, but it's like even in that, it's like you're still gonna need a guy to come in and edit it, right? You know what I mean? Like it's you still need an artist to make it art. You
Yeah,
understand? Like it's never gonna be you know the AI just literally spits out exactly what you want, exactly how you want. You know, it's I just don't see it. It doesn't make sense, and it's just not there yet, right? So like this is the commercial here, and it looks cool, right? But even then,
uh,
you still have that uncanny look to it that AI tends to have, right? Like the character is like inconsistent, like what I mean. Like it's just like how 3D was when it first hit the scene, right? There's that uncanny valley where people try to do that realism or hyper realism,
yeah,
and the brain always knows like that's not real, and that's
yeah,
happening.
yeah,
That's happening with AI. Like I'm looking at this. I'm like, that doesn't look like a person made this. It just doesn't. Right? There's something about it. It comes off as very eerie and detached. Right? And
uh,
that's why you still need an artist because even this, as goofy as it looks, it's like someone had to go in and touch it up. Someone had to go in and add the
right,
audio and the sound. Someone had to go in and edit it so that it had a narrative to it. Like
right.
it's a cohesive narrative. Like so, an artist still worked on this, right? And that's all I'm saying. It's like artists aren't gonna go anywhere. Just like with 3D, artists did disappear. They just had to to learn new skills. They just had to learn software, and new positions were created as a result. Right. You know, like when I first got into it, it was desktop publisher. I was like, what the heck is a desktop publisher? You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that evolved into now it's just all graphic design, right? There's no, but now it's not even graphic designer. You know, then there's web designer, right? Now it's just digital artist or UX UI artist, right? Or UX UI expert, right? You understand? Like it's just evolved, but it's the same things, right? And it's utilizing these tools, so it's not going anywhere. It's not, you just have to adapt, and adapting is hard. Trust me, I know. I've had to adapt many times. I went from doing traditional graphic design, where I learned how to use Exacto knives and Rubylith and transfers and all that, Letraset and all that stuff, to learning how to do it digitally on a computer. And I learned Photoshop and Illustrator, and that was hard. But I learned it right then. Once when I got, I got my stride, all of a sudden this whole web thing came up. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay. And now I had to learn web because when I was doing freelance, my customers kept asking me, okay, I have the business cards and stationery and the flyers and the T-shirt design, and now can you build us a website? And I had to say no because I had no idea how to build a website. And I'm like, I'm leaving money on the table, so I learned web design, right? And that's how I got into web, and you understand. Then it was app design, right? How to build an app. So I learned how to do that, then web development, back end and stuff. And, I learned about that. And you understand, like,
Yeah,
blogging and, it's now UX UI. I learned that. I took courses, learned about that. Now I do that, you know,
yeah,
well, it's, you just have to adapt, right? And it can be daunting and challenging, obviously, especially as you get older, because I'm an old guy, so I don't like change. you know, I want things to stay the same, right? But I gotta adapt. I gotta learn, and I'm
yeah.
still learning. I'm gonna probably be learning till I'm in the grave, because especially with technology, now there's game engines. I learned how to use game engine and all that, and because that's being integrated in so many things beyond just games or Hollywood, right?
That
It's
is true. Yeah,
architectural and so many other things.
Blender
Even
and stuff like that.
yeah, Blender. I learned Blender. It's like
People are
you just
using Blender to showcase houses.
yeah, that's right.
And
That's what I'm saying. Like it's so many things. Drafting and pre-visualization and concepting and app development. Phone apps and all this kind of stuff. Sky's the limit, and it's just up to us to recognize the opportunity and adapt, kind of roll with it. Just like I tell you and your brother, I'm like, you guys, learn AI, learn about, keep up with it, because at some point, there's going to be opportunities where they're going to say, hey, we need a IT person that understands AI, or we need a web developer that understands AI or how to apply. You understand what I mean? Like it's going to
yeah,
always be, you know, change. It's just going to happen. Industries are going to adapt, so we have to adapt with it. So I think artists, instead of being upset and angry, I mean, there's some validity to it for sure when it comes to like art theft. I agree with that. Like, and that's been worked out in the courts. So I think the same is happening with music right now,
hmm,
where it's make sure there's no music theft happening, infringement. So hopefully that all get worked out. But just the idea that the technology that allows you to create a streamlined and expedited production pipeline, I mean, it's invaluable. Because like forget learning models in the sense of pre-made models, right? Like currently, Mid Journey and all that. Um, think about as an artist, having the ability to take all of the art you've done, like you spent years developing your style and your creative look and feel, right? You have a way that you draw Spider-Man that no one else does, right? And you take all that and you feed it into this AI learning model, and you train it so that now you can tell it to output things in your style, and it's your style. It's not someone else's, right? That's powerful, man. You know, and then you can leverage all that and create even more, like do even more, and it's yours. Like that's to me, that's where the power is, you know, where we all like. I always think about Carol and Tuesday, that anime where you
Oh
know
yeah,
these AI machines that
kind
produce,
of relevant now.
yeah, that where they were producing music, right? And there was
Yeah,
one where it didn't just do the music, it made a video, like a music video, right? Like the little robot.
yeah,
It's like I think that's the future where we'll each just be able to have a some kind of AI workstation that we're gonna customize to create whatever, right? But it's gonna be our stuff, our ideas. You know what I mean? Like it's gonna be our imagination and our innovation. It's not gonna be the AI pulling from you know, somebody else's pre-made art, or whatever, infringing upon their art. It's going to be us saying, this is the body of work I've done over the last 5 or 10 years, and I'm going to feed it into this learning model, and now I can do prompts and tell it to give me something that's in my style, right? That's going to be powerful, and I think it'll be the same for music for musicians being able to put in their own musical sound bites and things like that, and creating a music library that allows them to compose music on the fly. Can you imagine? I mean,
yeah,
and it's all original music based on their music. Like that's to me,
hmm
that's powerful. That's what's amazing. So, so yeah, same thing with writers, right? Just imagine a writer, who's written like all these screenplays they were never published, right? They weren't purchased by anybody. They're just because right if you're at least if you're like a screenplay writer, you just write screenplays. You just have story piles of stories that will probably never see the light of day, right? But you can take that and just feed it into your AI, your own personal large language model, right? And now you can go to AI, hey, give me a story about XYZ, or give me a basic premise for a story involving this or that, right? Or give me a story outline where the hero does this and that, blah, blah, And now it's like inspiration, right? It'd be like having your own creative personal assistant, you know. And to me, that's where the magic's going to happen. Um, so yeah, don't reject it outright. Embrace it, learn about it, understand it, and figure out how you can capitalize off of it. That's my opinion. So, uh, but yeah, we're at 12 o'clock. It's noon. I think it's a good time to wrap it up and say thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening and watching. Thanks for interacting. Um, we appreciate it. And another super galactic Saturday under the belt. And I hope you guys will have a great day. Enjoy the weather. Get outside if you can. I know I will. And check out our stuff. Go to our site, supergalacticfantastic.com. Sign up to our mailing list so you can be notified when the campaign begins. We plan on launching later this year, around in the fall. So keep your eyes open for that. In the meantime, yeah, go to our site, check out some of our characters. I'm hoping to add a few more new characters. Some new characters uh, I need to add to the site, so you can check them out. So hopefully that'll be coming in the coming weeks. Trying to get their designs wrapped up. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and make it a wonderful day.
we'll see you around.